What's going on, Fantasy Underground? Thanks for tuning in for one more episode here. Welcome back. I hope you enjoyed the time off between stages. The summer showdown is over, so why am I here wearing sunglasses? Well, I'm going on vacation. After this week's matches, I actually am going on vacation for 2 weeks. So this is your last episode before your fantasy playoffs are done. There's a lot going on though. So I'm dropping one more show right before vacation and preparing for the Countdown Cup, aka the Fantasy Overwatch playoffs. I almost said fantasy football playoffs. I'm starting to prep for fantasy football season a little bit too, but that's a topic for another day. Although if you want to play some fantasy football with me, hit me up on Discord or in the comments and I will come find you and we will do a fantasy football league. So that doesn't mean it's the last show of the year. It just means I'm going to be doing some postseason stuff, post fantasy Overwatch season. And, we'll recap the year. We'll hand out off-season awards, all that kind of good stuff. One last detail. I will still be watching the matches this weekend. I just will be leaving shortly after the weekend. So follow me on Twitter if you want any of my thoughts on this weekend's matches. Fantasy OWUG to see my thoughts and musings there. So what are we talking about today? Well, the season's largely over, right? So pickups and waivers are a lot less important. It's more about min-maxing your lineups for playoffs, compositions. So we're going to look at some stats, my stats and Stats Lab actually, as we look at compositions and maybe a few clips here and there. Not too many today though. So sit back, relax, enjoy the show. The last one before your fantasy playoffs.
As decreed by Plat Chat on their wonderful Marbles RNG session, our bans for the upcoming Countdown Cup include Lucio, Echo, Ash, and Sigma. Highest scoring off-tank, 2 solid scoring DPSs, and Lucio, who not only scores pretty well, but enables a lot of other compositions. So Rhine, May, Reaper, they all become a lot less common with this being considered. So we're going to get into overall composition considerations, but first, your one pickup to consider for the week. The incredibly smart listener and Discord channel friend Quadski, or Quad as I call him. I have no idea what to actually call him. Let me know. He had a question about Twilight, and I think it was a really good one. I think Twilight is probably the wild card pickup for consideration. So when you look at Lucio bans, FD God has played almost exclusively Lucio, and while this may not be a stellar highlight of Twilight, teleporting into the back, using Coalescence, and immediately dying against the Outlaws, he's a solid player. And while I don't think he'll play Moira this stage, he has a good chance to be playing some flex support heroes. If we stop to look at the Shock's compositions, FD God has played, 90% Lucio this year? Something kind of crazy, very close to that, with just a little bit of Brig in there. We've seen Violet play everything, right? He's been infamous for that this year on BAP, on Moira, but we've seen him a fair amount on Lucio and on Brig. And Twilight has really only played the Ana, the BAP, and the Moira. Not that we have a large sample size, but I think there's enough reason to believe that Twilight could be in there playing some valuable flex support heroes. So FD God, until proven otherwise, is basically unplayable. And Twilight is an interesting, speculative, risky pickup that, he could actually pay off. So we're going to spend a lot of time on Stats Lab during this show because we're talking compositions and their team fight tool is really nice. There's this prevailing hive mind thought that's mostly correct that Shanghai dominated the Summer Showdown, and they did it with a composition of Sombra Tracer, Diva Ball, and Zen Brig. Unless you've been living under a rock, which is fair, maybe you are, it's crazy out there. You have seen that's the composition, and you've probably also seen that none of those heroes are banned, and so this becomes the de facto composition, the winning composition. The best team is running it. it is even better in the upcoming meta. So it stands to reason we'll see a lot more of it. I agree with that hive mind. That hive mind also is saying, not 100% of the time, but a lot of the time, they're saying that that's the only composition. That the West is going to have to learn this comp or die. And to that part, I don't entirely agree. Last stage, the Atlanta Reign for me were kind of the standard bearers for what that Western meta would be. Although the Fuel are typically the standard setters, they ran some minor variations based on their own skill sets as they tried to figure out other ways to beat the ball comp, whereas Atlanta, with the Mei, the Sim, the Diva, the Rhine, the Bap, and the Lucio, with Lucio banned, that really disables the Rhine, and it disables the Mei Symmetra composition. So that composition is over, it's done, and so is the West going to look like the East, or is there any possibility that they would do something else? Not an easy question to answer, but if we look over the course of the entire season, and we allow a look at all compositions, you start to see that some of the top compositions for the year, we could focus on the Fuel, we could focus on some others, but you start to see that there is a lot of Monkey Diva. We look at the Dallas Fuel's top compositions and we see the infamous Lucio Moira, which obviously isn't going to work with Lucio out, but we have seen a lot of Anna Brig, Monkey Diva, or Zarya Monkey for Double Bubble, with a smattering of other DPS combinations. Tracer, Sombra, Echo, Doomfist, all sorts of stuff in there. That composition is largely unaffected, so I kind of see a tale of two possible compositions. The Eastern Ball comp or the Western Monkey Dive comp. Basically, the Fuel comp versus the Dragons comp if I'm trying to oversimplify. There are other kind of crazy variations we've seen. Atlanta most recently ran a very defensive Reaper Torb, Bat Brig, and Rhine Diva comp, which is actually unaffected. Running a Rhine and Reaper without Lucio is very uncommon, but something we've seen them do. And, some other variants could come up. However, you are pretty heavily limited. So if we quickly try to break this down over the last stage on what heroes have performed well, if you're going to say you think Wrecking Ball really comes in, he doesn't score very well in fantasy. He's the 5th highest scoring tank behind Winston, Diva, Zarya, Sigma. Obviously the Sigma's out. He only scores really better than the Orisa and Reinhardt. Roadhog doesn't really have a sample size this last meta. So, although your Amangs and your Gagas and your Fates are going to score better than average on Wrecking Ball, they're going to be weighted down by the higher likelihood of playing that hero or a higher percentage time on ball. So you actually probably want to avoid those players. They're not going to be terrible, but they probably aren't championship winning level players this stage. The Western main tanks become very interesting. They're still extremely risky, but you could see players like Fearless, potentially players like Mag or Muse who have played a lot of Monkey this season, continue on that hero. I think it's possible and likely you see them on a little bit of both, maybe more Ball, maybe more Monkey, I don't really know. They are more viable than your Eastern main tanks, but still pretty risky. Despite Sigma being out, I think Diva and Zarya both very much complement both of those compositions, and I think your off tanks are going to be preferred. East or West, they're all good. Start your off tanks if you can. After that, I would prefer Western main tanks to Eastern main tanks. Support is where things get much more clear cut and in a very surprising way. This is the one part where I'd say listen up. Probably the most important point I will make today. Long point. I'm long-winded. You know that by now. So, highest scoring flex supports are typically going to be your Moira and your Baptiste. We haven't talked about them a lot yet. But if you would suppose or predict that any player was going to play these for any reasonable amount of time, they'd be extremely valuable when we think of the prevalence that we expect from Ana and from Zenyatta. So if we use StatsLab to look at Moira compositions across all teams this season, you can very, very quickly write her off because she is always paired with Lucio except on rare occasions. 37 total team fights this year. You look at the composition, 748 is the top composition. Only 37 team fights on a Moira Brig composition. We've seen it, not very common, not very likely. I think we can pretty much rule out that Moira gets any level of even nearly significant playtime. Baptiste, you'd say, that seems more likely. And I would agree, but not by a lot. If we look at the top Baptiste combinations, you'll see that he is for 825, 510, and 202 being the top compositions for him are all paired up with Lucio. With Lucio out, and you see just the viewing here, it's a lot of Lucio paired with Bap. So if you were to remove that, you look at the top compositions, you'd see a little bit of Bap and Mercy, and that was paired up on Double Shield. Well, Sigma's out. Double Shield is very good for poke compositions that include both Ashe and Echo. So, while an extremely different variant could pop out of this, we're not talking Delta variant, we're not talking Lambda variant, we're talking like 12 virus variants later. You could see something where BAP gets playtime from this composition. It just seems very, very unlikely. Same goes for the next composition down here. There's been 135 occurrences of BAP Brig. Hey, once more, it's with Sigma, it's with Mei. I really don't think BAP is likely. Maybe someone like Khan, who's really, really favored the hero. Paris will find a way to play around it. But even then, I'm not betting on it. So back to our stats. I think Baptiste, I think Moira are all out. Our top 3 scoring supports here. That brings up Zenyatta at number 4 and Ana at number 5. Brig at number 6. Zenyatta, this last meta, scored almost 3 whole points per 10 minutes higher than Ana did. If we extend that over the course of the entire year, the numbers do change quite a bit, and you start to see Zenyatta is at 21, Ana is at 19.6. There's still a pretty solid gap there. Zenyatta scores better than Ana, but in this particular meta, Zenyatta's were scoring pretty well. So, if we're looking at the prevalence of East versus West, the higher likelihood of Eastern flex supports playing Zenyatta with the possible smattering of Ana in the West, you start to see that for the first time this season, Eastern flex supports could and should be more valuable than Western flex supports. All year it's been Moira, it's been BAP, whereas the East has played more of the Ana and the Zenyatta. So I'm not going to say de facto, you have to play all Eastern flex supports. I'm just saying for the first time you have to consider that someone like MCD might actually be more valuable than someone like Iris. It's tough to say. I'm not certain on it, but I think that tipping of the scales is favoring the East. So in the first week, I think I'll be picking Eastern flex supports at a slightly higher rate than the Westerns in Royales. And in leagues where I'm looking at those type questions on, do I go Bebe or do I go MCD? Do I go, Fielder, or do I go Izayaki? I'm going Izayaki. Fielder, more likely to be on the Ana, and he could even be benched for someone like Repel. So any roster-specific decisions revolving around Zenyatta and Ana, keep this one in mind. I think it's an important one. Another really, really important point here as we pivot over to DPSs. Finally got some clips for you here. I told you I'd have a little bit. We finally have Mei out of the rotation. Not exactly. She can still be played. But with Lucio out, her usability drops drastically. So your projectile players who typically score more fantasy points than your hit scans, except for Mei, who drags them down horribly, they gain a lot of value. So some of these guys like Nero and Naga, who have been playing a ton of Mei throughout the year, they could have a lot more value because Pharah scores extremely well. We'll pull up a list in a second, but some of your guys drag down a little bit by the Mei play, start to go away a little bit. If we look from the Summer Showdown, Pharah is the second highest scoring DPS, And if we extend that over the course of the full year, the same trend really continues. Pharah is still your second highest scoring DPS. So you would say if Pharah is going to get played, you sure would want your heroes playing you would want your players that you started on that specific hero. I'm not guaranteeing Pharah gets played a lot, but we did see both the hunters and the dragons, and even, the gladiators and Paris mess around with Pharah a little bit. And there's a lot of reasons why it could work this way. If we pull up some Pharah specific stats without Ashe, without Echo, those are some really solid counters to Pharah. And if Pharah was already getting some run with both of those heroes still in the pool, it makes Pharah that much more viable. So let's take a look. Jinmu, I think, is kind of king of the Pharah this year. Not scoring at the highest rate, but he's up there. He's been extremely solid. If you watch him for any amount of time, he is insane, but he is extremely good on the Pharah. Fleta has also played a solid amount of Pharah. Not a ton, but remains looking good. Naga, I don't know how well known it is, but I feel like Naga in contenders, this is his best hero by far. So I actually really like Naga this go around. If he's on the Pharah, could be putting up some crazy points. Always been a fan. I'm a Nero stan. I think Nero has the possibility to play some Pharah. Sparkle, the best air-to-air Pharah I have ever seen. Fantastic on the hero. Signature almost as much as his Doomfist. Yaki's risky with Florida's situation, but he becomes very interesting here. And then, you look down the list. Prophet, pretty good. Kevster, pretty good. Mirror, pretty good. They're all solid on that hero. I think all their values increase quite a bit here. What's the one thing better than your hero playing Pharah? Now, there's still a risk that your projectile players get benched. If you got a heavy Tracer Sombra meta, you'd say, well, the Pharah is the projectile, they might be out. Well, you might guess from the clip here that anybody who plays both Pharah and Tracer for their team is going to be the best type of player to pick up this meta. Kind of like the first time around, we were saying if you can play both Ashe and Tracer, you're going to be the best DPS setup for the first stage. In this stage, I feel very confident in saying that if you are your team's Tracer / Pharah, you are the most valuable. So in consideration for who to start and who to put in your Royales, I further like even more players like Naga, who have shown they can both play the Pharah and the Tracer. Nero, to a lesser extent, with Glister on his team, I think he could end up not playing as much Tracer, but we've seen it from him in the past that he's really actually quite good on the hero. If we're looking at others, Fleta, already doing it. Kevster, already doing it. Sparkle, already doing it. Those guys will gain even more valuable this meta. I think Naga and probably Nero are the standouts that their value could increase drastically over prior stages. I'd be remiss if I didn't mention Yaki. Once again, if Florida can halfway get their act together, Yaki, amazing on both of those heroes. As far as who this meta is bad for from a DPS perspective, my brain first went to Leave, and I immediately turned it off. I was like, Leave is amazing on McCree, he's amazing on Tracer, even if his signature heroes are his Echo and his Ashe. You look for another team on the East, though, and I get very, very worried about some of your hit scans, particularly Shy. Let's take a look at some Shy stats. If you look at Shy over the course of the season, he's been incredible. But he's been incredible specifically on two heroes. Unfortunately, that's Ashe and Echo. That's made up, I should probably pie chart instead of bar chart this for this particular view. But, it's like 2/3 of his season has been spent playing Ashe and Echo. Seen a little bit of Hanzo. He's looked really good on the McCree. And we've also seen him on the Tracer, where honestly, I've not loved him. I think he's been a B tier Tracer behind, your A and your S tier. And then just a tiny bit of the Reaper, tiny bit of Hanzo. All things considered, Shy's an incredible player, but he is getting hard nerfed by this particular hero ban. I'm worried about him for fantasy. He's going to have to unlock another level of superstar potential that we've yet to see. Now it's Shy. The sky's the limit for this guy, but I will say that I think he takes a dip, and if you have other really good DPS options and you've been riding Shy to some victories all year, I think you have to revisit that one. There are definitely still going to be a lot worse options out there. I'm not saying Shy is dumpster tier. I'm just saying I'm nervous, and I think his value goes down quite a bit. Other hard hit scam players like Guangbong, like Kai, I think they're potentially going to suffer as well because of the lower prevalence, lower likelihood of McCree, along with them being superstars on the Ash. If we once again go back to the full year on Stats Lab and we want to take a look at McCree, it's not that McCree isn't going to get played, but I think McCree's going to get played a lot less. So when we see these numbers pop up for us, his top two compositions, two of the top three, he's got Lucio in there. That is by far the biggest comp, the Lucio BAP, May McCree. With Lucio out, Reinhardt likely to follow, that composition goes out the window. The similar comp that has Sigma instead of Diva is also out the window, but we have seen McCree Tracer, Monkey, Zarya, and Ana Brig in the double bubble, and I think that composition is still viable. There's a lot of teams that could turn pretty heavily towards that. You think of teams like Paris, with the way they've kind of shown that lineup a lot in the past. I still think maybe this is something the Spark would go to with the Architect Tracer, the Gushui Monkey, the McCree, for Shy. Those teams could get locked into this composition. So this variant of the Monkey Dive could still be around, although I don't expect it to be a majority. So something to consider. Shy still has some value, just a little bit less, and other hard hit scam players, their team is going to have to play this comp for them to get any kind of value on the McCree. Other heroes out there, I don't think Widow's super likely. Reaper also a lot less likely with Lucio out. So limited number of options here. Last thing I've got on the menu is schedules. I've got Bird Ring here. I'll explain that one in a second. Since I'm going to be gone for a few weeks running, I have to show the schedule for the next 3 weeks. I always try and rank matchups because in Royales, I specifically want to get players in good matchups. And for me, in starting lineups, it's also a tiebreaker on who to start. From the listing here, and I'm not going to read these individually, I hope you're watching. You can grab a quick screenshot. You probably don't want to hear me list off all these teams anyway. Week 17 and 18 have some pretty bad lineups. Got Bird Ring here laughing. I forget what the joke was in their hype video. Cracked me up. I loved it. So we got Bird Ring here laughing. There's not really any good matchups for week 17 and 18. Plenty of good ones in week 16 where you've got some solid teams facing off against each other. But in 17 and 18 where you've got the Titans, Valiant, Spitfire all playing so much, and a lot of teams have one good, one bad matchup. Assuming Mayhem are struggling, the Gladiators and Outlaws both play each other, but also the Mayhem. Spark, yeah, they play the Hunters, but then they also play the Charge. Defiant, if we're relying on Defiant players in the final, they have a solid matchup against both the Eternal and the Shock, but not something I'm banking on there. So there's a lot of unfavorable matchups in the last couple weeks here. You hate to see it for fantasy playoffs. Week 16 should be great. 17 and 18, it's going to be a little bit of a dice roll. As with any stage, keep an eye out how things progress after the first week. Teams' power levels can jump and drop pretty drastically. So be careful. Don't rely on this too much, but it's my best guess as of right now. Some final thoughts here as we close down. This is the finals. This is playoffs coming up. It's a kind of a microcosm of the entire year. You can't guarantee that you'll win every matchup. Sometimes there's a matter of luck in here. I'd like to think running a YouTube channel on this that I can predict the future, but fact of the matter is, in any given week, anything can happen. So don't stress, don't worry about it. If you don't win your league, it happens. If you're making it to the playoffs and getting pretty far, you're already doing a good job. So please don't stress, don't worry about it. It's not worth it. There's enough other things in life to spend your stress points on. Other thing, since this is my last episode before fantasy playoffs are over, I want to wish you good luck. I do hope you win, unless you're playing against me in any of our many joint leagues together. And outside of that, I want to thank you for listening. I say that a lot on this show, but I've had a fantastic time making it this year. It's not over. We're going to have postseason awards, like I mentioned up front. There's going to be more shows to come. I can't help but make fantasy Overwatch content. And once the season is over, we're less in a flurry of trying to keep up with week-to-week matches, but we can take a step back, look at strategy, look at the big picture. And honestly, I really enjoy that piece too. So I hope you stick around in the off season. I'll be back soon once I return from the beach from an undisclosed location. I'm certainly going to enjoy vacation, unplugging for a little while here. I'll miss you all. I'll miss watching as much Overwatch, but I won't miss you too much. Who am I kidding? Vacation's coming up. I'll talk to you soon. Have a good one, everyone.